Hello and welcome. I'm Rick Roller, and tonight we're going to be talking about some federal laws and some other concepts and reviewing some questions that will help you very much as you go in to complete and pass your real estate exam. First of all, I want to start out by saying I compliment you on pursuing a real estate license at this time. I got into the business in about 1978, and it was well, we're in a full-blown recession, and a lot of people said, "Well, it's a horrible time to get into real estate. The market's down, the interest rates were up. It was around 10.5% at that time." And man, that's the time when people need help. If it's a fantastic market, if interest rates are, like 5.5 or 3.5 and whatever, and the market is hot and there's a little inventory and that sort of thing. Um, eh, that's when people can sell it themselves. But the market we're entering into now, they need a professional to help guide them, particularly on pricing. And get good at pricing, and you're going to do fine. So I compliment you. This is a great time to get into real estate. But before you get into real estate, you got to pass this exam. So tonight we're going to be working on a series of questions, running the techno part of this particular presentation tonight is our good friend Matt Cliff, who is I don't know, Matt's kind of the glue that holds our school together, Matt. So we really appreciate you being here tonight. So let's just jump right in. Let's start with question number one, which is a federal law called CERCLA. And here we go. Bring up the question, please. Okay. CERCLA is also known as Superfund, or B, the Environmental Protection Act, or C, the Waste Cleanup Act, or D, Environmental Hazard Control. Now, environmental on B and D is suspicious when they do things like that. And Waste Cleanup Act, I don't know. But the correct answer, of course, is Superfund. CERCLA is also known as the Superfund Act. And it's a federal law, was put into effect a number of years ago, and it's going to be on the test. So what you need to tie together is the term Superfund and CERCLA.
Welcome, we're so glad to see you. We want to help as many people as possible to get started in their real estate career. If you like what you see in these videos, be sure to show our instructors that you appreciate them by giving them a like. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss a single one of our topics, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Guess what? We have helped more students successfully start their real estate career than any other school that we have stats for. If you want to get in on that action, go to the description, click on the Prep My Exam link. We have audio reviews, we have thousands of practice questions, we've got an exam simulator, and we've got a little secret surprise that might be your golden ticket to starting your real estate career right. So go ahead and click the link, and we'll see you there.
Which of the following is an environmental hazard based on the decay of radioactive materials? Is it lead? No, lead's pretty much inert. Is it carbon monoxide? Well, that's a really bad thing, especially if, you're running your car in the garage with the door closed. Radon or mold? Well, mold is not necessarily a decay of radioactive material. It is definitely decay of something, but it's not, or the growth of something, but it's not that. Of these three guys, it is radon, and you probably knew that. Radon is a very common thing. It's popular for a lot of people, depending on the geographic location where the property is located. But some areas are worse than others. I started selling real estate in Grand Junction, Colorado, where we had some significant radon issues, um, mostly because of some mining mill tailings and whatnot. But radon it's everywhere, but in some concentrations it can actually be bad. So doing a radon test is not a bad idea. Doing a methamphetamine test is not a bad idea, particularly in Salt Lake. But radon is the correct answer. Uh, Lead isn't going to hurt anyone unless you lick it or try to eat it. And mold, It can be mitigated. And carbon monoxide, well, just don't run your car with the garage door closed. But radon is the correct answer here. Number three, please. Which of the following contributes to mold growth? Well-ventilated home, dry, dusty interiors. Now, both those would help mitigate mold growth. Mold needs moisture. And if something is ventilated, it's going to keep things fairly dry. Lead-based paint has nothing to do with mold growth. So that leaves us with high humidity. It's kind of wet. And if you're in Florida or some areas where, there's just a lot of moisture in the air and whatnot, that's where you have a lot of mold problems. If you're in the high desert, like a lot of Utah is, we have fewer mold problems. But that doesn't mean you don't have mold problems. I mean, we do have mold problems in Utah quite a bit where you've had leaky water pipes. And some people, they're just slow leaks and they didn't really realize. So a lot of times in, some of the basement areas, or if there is kind of um, a foundation that's raised and the house was built in there, and there's kind of a void between the dirt and the bottom of the floor. That's where you're gonna, if it's high humidity, and if in our area, if there's been water leakage, um, you need to have it looked at. And home inspectors will come through and they will allay any problems with that. But if they do find mold, it can be mitigated. It can be fixed. And there's professionals that will come out and take care of that, and everything will be fine. It doesn't necessarily have to kill a deal, but it's something that some of your buyers are going to be very concerned about. So you need to work with them on that. High humidity, yeah, it could be a real problem. Next question, please. If a buyer suspects there may be a radon issue in a home they want to buy, what should they do? Have the home tested? Hire a mechanic? What? You need a tune-up? New spark plugs? Don't think so. Get a home warranty? Well, home warranties don't necessarily cover pre-existing problems. So if you're buying a home that has a pre-existing problem and getting a home warranty, there's a specific exclusion for things that were there before the warranty was there. Usually the home warranty is for things that come up in the future that weren't there when they bought the home. So that won't work. You know, D, get private mortgage insurance. What would that have to do with radon? Private mortgage insurance really just benefits a bank, doesn't benefit the home buyer or the homeowner at all. It's private mortgage insurance is where you put less than 20% down, and the bank is a little uncomfortable with that. 5% down. FHA has FHA insurance. VA has a benefit to the veterans for their service to our country. They can get a very high ratioed, if not zero down loan. Sometimes they have to come up with 1% for some fees and whatnot, but that's part of their benefit, for putting on the uniform and serving your country. But for those of us that did not do that, or for your buyers that did not do that, then of course, if they put down less than 20%, it's not insurance that covers hail damage or a fire or that kind of thing. Private mortgage insurance is nothing more than if the loan payments aren't made and there is a foreclosure, they come in and kind of bail out the bank a little bit, and so that's what it's all about. It's a benefit to a buyer because it allows them to to come and buy a property with a smaller down payment. Traditionally they want 20%. And if you've got 20%, you don't have to do private mortgage insurance. Now, the rub on all this is the fact that there's a fee for this private mortgage insurance. Well, who pays the fee? Well, the borrower pays the fee. And you're paying the fee because you came to the transaction with less than 20% down. Ways to avoid it? Well, if you can find a seller that would, the best way to avoid it is come in with 20% down of your own money, or or maybe, grandma gives you a gift letter for some of that. I don't know, but the underwriter will, be all involved with that. But they want the 20% down. If it's going to be less than 20% down, there's going to be private mortgage insurance involved, it in no way benefits anyone except for the bank. Because if there is a foreclosure, there's a little bit of bailout in there for them. So, you know, what should they do if there's radon? Definitely not private mortgage insurance. Definitely not a home warranty. That's future, not past. Uh, I don't know what they mean by mechanic. I mean, maybe a home repair guy, but really, if it's a radon issue, you know, the only thing you can do to really make sure it's there is to have the home tested. And if it is an issue, well, then you go back and you negotiate some sort of remediation problem or participation, maybe from the seller. Maybe you split the cost. Maybe the seller pays the whole cost. Maybe you just walk away. If you're a buyer and that's something that they don't want to help you with or you're very concerned about. Um, when I started selling real estate, it was in Grand Junction, Colorado, and we had a horrible radon problem in Grand Junction, Colorado, primarily because there was a uranium mill in Grand Junction, Colorado, and because there are a lot of there are a lot of uranium mines in different parts of Utah and Colorado, and that for Colorado would be the western southwestern portion, and for Utah it would be the southeastern portion. But there's a lot of uranium mining done in those areas, and the problem we had in Grand Junction was we had that mill, where they'd bring the ore and they would concentrate it, and that left a byproduct of sand that was had a lot of radon in it. It was a little bit radioactive, and it wasn't. Um, it wasn't glowing at night or anything like that, but because radon is a colorless, odorless gas, you really, you have to test to see if it's there. But unfortunately, what a lot of people did in that Grand Junction, Colorado area is they would go and they would scoop up that nice, clean sand that was the byproduct of the refinement and concentration of the uranium, and they would use it to fill in around their foundations. And they found out later that it was radioactive. So there was a lot of problems. And finally, there was some federal bailout money that got involved. And so people had to remediate that. One of the problems was they would fill around the foundations. And of course, then they radon gas. But a lot of people thought it was really cool to take that sand and because there was a lot of clay, and they wanted a better garden, and they would mix that sand in their clay to make what they thought was better dirt for their garden, and then they have kind of a radioactive vegetable plot. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they had bigger pumpkins because of that. I really don't know. But the only way you're really going to tell is if you have a home tested, and testing for radon is not a bad idea, and uh, and it's not that expensive either. And in addition to that, like I suggested just a few moments ago, methamphetamine is a real problem. It's a real problem in Utah. And so the problem is if that home has been used as a meth manufacturing plant, um, which happens, it's and then you find out your tenants move out, you better fix that. I mean, you're gonna have to rip out the carpet. You might even have to redo the subfloor. You might have to repaint all the walls and ceilings. And it can be a real problem. But it's not a bad idea to have a radon test. If you're the buyer, because if you find out later you have it, you're not going to be a happy camper. It can be fixed, and it can be fixed. Um, by replacing things like I mentioned earlier, or painting over things. But that can run into big money if you have to recarpet a house and whatnot. So, and maybe it needed it anyway. I don't know. But doing a radon and N-methamphetamine test is something that uh, you might want to talk to your buyers about doing. Okay. In some cases, I asked the seller to do it, and those are cases where they've used the house as a rental. One of the areas that you might want to try to get business out of are out-of-state owners. Out-of-state owners that are renting their properties out, and some tenants, they've got drug issues, and so that's one thing you test for. But the radon test, they're not that expensive, and it with an out-of-town owner, I push them to do two things. Number one is to do a home um, survey or home study, home investigation, and that's going to cost them about $150. So, it could run as high as $200. But if they're an out-of-town owner, I suggest they do that, and I also suggest that they do the meth, and I also suggest that they provide a home warranty for the buyer. Why? Well, when you list a house for sale, the seller has to fill out a property condition statement. And unfortunately, if this owner is in California, maybe his, one of the spouses inherited the house. It was, used as a rental in the family for a while, and then the family decided, well, let's just get rid of it and split up the proceeds. Um, you don't know. You don't know who's been in that house, and so that's one thing that I ask them to do. That and provide the home warranty. Home warranty won't cover a pre-existing problem, like I said earlier, but if there is a problem that comes up, it's very helpful. I'd much rather see the buyer pay a 50 or $100 deductible than 600 or 700 bucks to fix something, or even if a dishwasher goes out or a furnace. And cost of home warranties, they're not cheap, but they're not horribly expensive either. So a home inspection and a home warranty, an out-of-town owner should be able to get both those for around $1,200, $1,400, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. Depends on how big the house is, how many furnaces, how many other things are in the house that need to be covered. Um, but testing for these things is just part of the process, and if you find a problem, then you can fix it. Now, a lot of homeowners will say, "Well, I don't want to pay for that." And I say, "Well, look at it this way." And they'll say, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, it is the cheapest lawsuit insurance that you're ever going to get, So 12, $1,400, whatever it costs to do that. I mean, we used to get it done for under 1,000, but prices have gone up a little bit. Um, if they're an out-of-town owner and they haven't even seen the property in 3 or 4 years, I just think it's a good idea. And the way I explain it to them, it's the best lawsuit insurance that you could ever buy. Because if there is a problem, someone will come in and get it fixed. Hiring a mechanic, now home warranty. Home warranty won't cover pre-existing, and then get private mortgage insurance. That has nothing to do with radon issues. Next question, please. Okay. Asbestos. Nasty stuff. Now, it used to be that if you had one of those popcorn type ceilings, I'm just looking up at mine. um, this house was built in about 1978, so we actually we had a little popcorn ceilings in one or two of the. I'm down here in the basement. We finished this after we bought it, so it's all new. But upstairs there was a couple of rooms that had that, and we just took it all out and retextured the ceilings because and we never even had it tested. I didn't think it had any asbestos in it, but how do you get rid of it? Well, the best way to that they have for well, the best way is to put on mask and whatnot and scrape it out and repaint and cap but the repainting is another way of doing it, and that's if they just want to do it that way, and it's just in encapsulation, which means you just cover it. So the only way it's really going to cause you any problem is if somebody climbs up there and starts eating it, or it scrapes down and falls, and people put it in their mouth and whatnot. But it could actually start falling down in one way or another, and so you encapsulate it. You A lot of people use the Kills product, which is a real strong pigmented type paint that will encapsulate it, and that's probably what you're going to have to do. Also talking about asbestos, and our next question here is, not how do you contain it, but why does it become a health hazard? Well, or because it's fragile. No, no, that's okay. It's fragile. It's not saturated. If it's been encapsulated, it's probably okay. I mean, it's not going to come down. Unless the ceiling starts coming down, but it probably won't. Crystallization, that's just a throwaway. It's fragile, and so little pieces of it fall off. Now, where you see this more than the um, popcorn type, spackled ceilings, is in the uh, older homes that had the huge old furnaces, and they had all these pipes coming out of it, going to the different rooms and whatnot. And back in the old days, in the 50s, when those houses were built, or even earlier, they used an insulation around those pipes, and that insulation actually had asbestos in it. And so, I guess you could take it out, but that's, the better way to do it is to encapsulate it, which we saw in the last question, because when that old insulation starts to disintegrate, or if they're down there knocking things around in the basement or whatever, or if there's tremors or earthquakes, and whatever would cause that old insulation to shake, then it's fragile. So dust comes out of it, and that's where the asbestos is, in the dust. It can be a real problem, but it can be handled. Um, but if it's an older home and it has suspicious looking, uh, older, kind of paper wrapped insulation on the, you're you might want to have it checked. Um, Especially if you're representing a buyer, but even if you're representing a seller, you need to have things tested, and which brings me back to the out of town owner, because even though it's going to cost the out of town owner maybe about $1,200 or so to get the house inspected, and also to provide a home warranty, I just tell them it's the best lawsuit insurance they're ever going to get, which you already mentioned. But it is what it is. Now, a lot of these houses that have been rented, I mean, some of them are even free and clear. One of the two spouses, and they're living now in California. His parents died, and she or he inherited the house, and a lot of times it's free and clear. I mean, they can afford to do these tests, and if there is a problem, actually to do some cleanup, or do some uh, encapsulating things, or whatever it might take, in order to make that a safe house. Most people don't want to sell a house it's going to cause, cancer in somebody or whatever. They want to feel good about it. And, if it's that type of situation I just mentioned, there's usually plenty of equity to take care of these problems. Next question, please. Which of the following might indicate an environmental hazard on a property? Well, A, a covered well. Mm, Discolored dirt around an underground tank. Ah, yeah. What about a slanted driveway? Well, that could be expansive soil or something. Or if it's just a slanted driveway, a lot of driveways are. The house was built on a little higher up than the street. It's going to have a slant on it. The lack of trees. You know, when the pioneers first came into the Salt Lake Valley, there was one tree. One tree, and it was there for it's kind of in the downtown area. It was like about fourth east, and well, about fourth south. It was in that area, and it was there for many, many years. He even had a plaque put in front of it one night. Then some idiot came by one night and sawed it down and ran off with it. Special place in hell for people like that. But anyway, not a lot of trees. So all the trees that you see around here were, planted, and so you know, that's not our answer. Slanted driveway is not our answer. Okay, and a covered well is not our answer. But this discolored dirt around an underground tank, yeah, that's a problem, because that's an indication there's a leak for whatever diesel fuel or heating oil or, whatever was in that tank, that underground tank, it's going to be a problem. In commercial real estate, we do a historical search. Let's say you're selling a vacant lot, but it's in a downtown area. Obviously, there may have been a property on there at one time or not. There was a particular property here in Salt Lake City on State Street and just north, no, just south of I-215, and it was a vacant lot. It sat in great lot, you know, and I thought it'd be a great place for like an eatery, and so someone bought it, and they put in a couple different eateries, and they just can't seem to make it work. But so right now it's a vacant building. I think the last one was in there was Kentucky Fried Chicken. But one of the problems that property had forever and ever, and why it was never built on, is because it had contaminated soil. And so, whatever price they eventually ended up selling for, there was quite a substantial cleanup fee. It was around 20 some $1,000 just to dig up some of the dirt that had been brought in there, that someone thought, oh, well, we'll make this nice and level. Yeah, but they got dirt that had contamination in it. Anyway, it's like 2 steps forward and 16 steps backwards, but it sat forever until finally, prices went up to the point where it was profitable enough to clean up all that oil, that contaminated soil, and put in some clean soil. Yeah, so it wasn't a problem anymore. But there's a lot of properties like that. There was another area in Park City that was close to the downtown area. It was just beautiful. I mean, it was just is man, it would be a great subdivision lot. And eventually that's what it became. But the problem they had with that property was that it was, the mines up there used that for a tailing dump site. And it was discovered that there was a high concentration of lead. Oh, that's a real problem. So they ended up capping that with some better soil, and now it has to be disclosed to anyone that buys in that subdivision that there's contaminated soil. So if they want to put in a garden, they better do it with garden boxes. They don't want the roots going down too far. In fact, they may even want to put those garden boxes on some sort of a barrier so that the roots can't get down, below a pad or whatever they put on it. But discolored, but the answer to this one, that indicates it might be an environment, because you're not going to tell. I mean, you can't tell if there's lead poisoning in that dirt or not unless you do a test. You can't tell if there's other types of contaminants if it was a mine mill tailing type site, either, unless you just do a study. And these sites are well known to realtors in the area, and this is one great argument on why it's good to use a local realtor. I mean, yes, you have a license that allows you to sell real estate anywhere in the state of Utah. It is a Utah real estate license. So you can run down to Moab, you can run all over town, even if you live in Sandy like I do. I mean, that's great, but do you really know what's going on down there? You can make it work, and I'm not saying you should refer out all your business. I mean, if your mom and dad came to you and said, hey, we want to buy a $2 million house in Park City, I'm not going to refer that out. I want to take them to Park City on my own, even though that's in a um, now we have more of a cooperative MLS arrangement with Park City. But there was a time when they had their own MLS system and they didn't want us coming to Park City. They just wanted us referring to buyers. But you can still work around that. I mean, you just go to the listing agents. You go to the big companies in town that seem to have a lot of signs and say, hey, I'm looking for something like this. Do you have any listings like that? The listing agent doesn't, they'd love to sell it themselves, but on the other hand, they're not expecting the whole commission most of the time. It's nice if you can find your own buyer, because the communication between the agents, when you're on the buyer side and you're on the seller side, is really good. You just get caught up in the shower. So how are we doing with the Johnsons? Oh, just fine. Just talk to yourself and you're great shape. But discolored dirt around an underground tank is a real problem, and working too far out of your own area is a real problem. But it depends. If you work with the listing agents, as long as you're licensed, they would love to make a sale. And so you go to the different offices, ask around, or you see a sign on something and checked out, and you can do it. But you're not going to be as acquainted as you probably should be. So have some long discussions with the listing agent so that um, what some of the challenges might be with those particular areas or particular problems or particular properties. Okay, back to CERCLA again. Here we go. Super fun. CERCLA super fun. Yeah, we tied those together right from the get-go here tonight. Provides funds for the abatement, which is kind of a cure, of what? Mosquitoes? Yeah, okay. Toxic sites, wetlands. How are you going to cure a wetland? Put in a drainage system? I don't think so. Radon? Okay, guys, yeah, come on. Mosquitoes is a throwaway. Wetlands and radon, no, it's toxic sites. Superfund is where you have sites, and we do have these sites. We've got them in Park City. We have them here in Midvale, here in the Salt Lake Valley. There's a couple other sites. Tooele has some issues. You just have to know the area, and of course, working directly with the listing agents, or if you are the listing agent, you know, they're they're not going to hide things. They're going to let you know. Okay, but certainly not mosquitoes. They're somewhat transient. Okay, next question, please. Okay, according to the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act, which we call for short SARA. Okay, according to this, what is it? Is it an owner will not be liable for contamination happened before they purchased the property? No, no, you bought it, you own it, and so, well, wait a minute, that would happen before I owned it. Well, yeah, it's true. Maybe you shouldn't have bought it because it's yours now. And so you're gonna clean it up, maybe. Okay, all right. So an owner will be liable for contamination only if they knew of the contamination? No, that's see, an owner will be liable for their own actions, but not for the actions of others on their property? That doesn't sound like a federal law, does it? Okay, D, an owner may be liable for contamination of their land even if they didn't own it when the contamination occurred. Hey, yeah, it's yours. You own it now. So you should have known, or you should have had it tested, before you bought it, but whatever. Also, be very leery of property where you need some fill. And people will approach you and say, hey, we're doing some digging over here or there. We need to dump some dirt somewhere. Do you mind if we, come and dump it on your property? And we'll make sure that um, you have some assurances one way or another that they're not hauling in contaminated soil. Just be careful. Just be careful. Okay. Next question, please. O was buying a home from S. S bought the home when it was first built in 1961. Well, longtime owner. And while the original paint was lead based, they had it all removed and repainted years ago. There have been several paint jobs in homes since then. So what is true? Okay. What is true? A. S needs not disclose anything about lead based paint since it's been removed or remediated. B. S need not disclose anything about lead-based paint since it's been more than one paint job since then. Okay. C. S needs not disclose anything about the lead-based paint unless O inquires about it. S must disclose all information they have about lead-based paint in the home. Gosh, guys, what do you think? Well, if you're leaning towards D, you have excellent instincts. Okay. You got to disclose. I mean, even it's been remediated. Okay, you have to disclose. Yeah, it had it, but we fixed it, and here's what we did. Now, how do they know it's fixed? Um, well, mostly they're concerned about chipped paint, little paint chips, and kids come around, oh, that looks like a Skittle, and they eat it, and they're eating lead, which is horrible. It's not a good thing. It's a poison. Lead's a poison. Or they rub their hands on the walls and they stick it in their mouth. That's why covering it is one of the ways of getting rid of it. But, if even though it's been fixed, you need to let them know. What if the roof leaked and they fixed it and it hasn't leaked in the 3 years since they fixed it? You still need to let them know that, yeah, I had a leak, but we fixed it and it hasn't been a problem since then. Anything, anything that could be considered a material fact. And a material fact is something that could affect money. Okay. It affects, the value of a property. Um, or it could be some sort of a health issue, which also affects the value of the property. It has to be disclosed. Disclose, 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 even if you fixed it. Now, there's some things that we have a state law that was put into effect by Al Mansell. Al Mansell was a very uh, prominent uh, leader in our industry of real estate. Actually, he was president of the National Association of Realtors, and state president of the local Utah Association of Realtors and whatnot. I mean, a very active, served on the real estate commission as well. And he was also on the state legislature. So he passed a law, or got a law passed, that about stigmatized properties. Now, a stigmatized property is somewhere where something horrible's happened in the property. I mean, someone died in the property, or someone was murdered in the property, or someone was injured in one way or another by a violent attack, like a rape or something like that. That's a stigmatized property. And there are laws that will protect you against non-disclosure in certain instances. And we do go over those in class at another time, but uh, especially if it was someone died, or there's a situation where we had a listing one time, and it beautiful area. It was in the mouth of the canyons, Little Cottonwood Canyon actually, and a lady who lived in a cul-de-sac right there by where you drive into the canyon, had died, and she died in the house. Had a heart attack, fell over and died. And the neighbors noticed that the mail was kind of stacking up, and there were some newspapers that were stacking up, and they went over and peeked in the garage, and her car was still there. And they said, there's a problem here. And they called the police. And the police they made entry into the property, and she was there and partially decomposed. But that's a stigmatizing type thing. Now, Al Mansell's law says we don't have to disclose that. However, are they going to find out sooner or later? Oh, yeah. Well, we had it listed, and so we talked it over. The lady had died in the home. We were working with the heirs, and they said, "Well, do we have to disclose that?" I said, "Well, according to the law, no, we don't. But according to our business practices, we need to." And they say, "Well, why?" Well, because they're going to find out. And probably they're going to find out during the escrow period. And, I mean, they need to be okay with it from the get-go. So so we disclosed it, and some people from New York came along. They didn't care, and so they bought the property and put it under contract. And, we had told them up front, that's fine with them. I mean, come on, that's things can happen in a home. And they lived there about 2 years, and then they got another job transfer, and they listed it with us. And, partially because of the fact we were so upfront and honest and truthful with them. So you need to talk to your broker, and if it is it fall into the stigmatized category, um, even though the seller says, well, maybe we shouldn't disclose, they're going to find out. I mean, during the escrow period, they might just, hey, let's go over and look at the house, And so they're walking around the house, and that they probably can't get inside because it's not theirs yet, but they can walk around the outside. Oh, we should measure to see if there's room for our RV on the side, if we want to put a pad up and whatnot. So, or they just get excited and want to go look at it, and there's nobody there. Maybe it's a vacant property. And so they're there, and the neighbors might drop by. Hey, are you going to be the new owners? Yeah. Sure. Oh man, did you know what happened here? So they're going to find out. So it's better if you let them know up front, and then everything's fine. And then because you're so truthful, when they want to move in 2 years, you might get the listing. So it was buying a home, and you're going to disclose everything, even you don't have to on some things. But I would recommend you disclose everything. Just be upfront with people. And if it's something that's going to really bother them, then it's really going to bother them when you didn't tell them, and they're going to make it their mission in life to try to destroy your real estate business. They might see your sign down the street, pull over, and go rap on the door and say, "Do you know what this agent did to us? They sold us that house and didn't tell us, and we're upset." That kind of thing. Nah, they'd never do that. Okay, the next question, please. Okay, land that frequently floods. Hmm. Or has vegetation standing water. Okay. Is this an environmental hazard? Well, environmental hazards mean something that can actually harm you. I don't know. If things can flood and there could be standing water, but it's not necessarily an environmental hazard. Okay. Is this a riparian sector? Yeah. Okay. Riparian is kind of a right, to use a property for one thing or another, but hey, it has something to do with water, so it's not a bad distractor, but it's not the answer. Is it a wetland? And that if you're leaning towards that one, you have excellent instincts. And but it's not an easement. An easement could be for a view. Normally, they're for ingress and egress. You have the right to cross another person's property to get to your property. Maybe it was landlocked or something, or um, utility companies have easements so they can put in different utility lines and whatnot. So that's kind of how that works. Okay. Okay. Where are we? Land that frequently. You should really number these guys. Uh, okay. No. Okay. Well, you don't care. Land that. Oh, wait a minute. Where are we? Did we do land that frequent? Oh, yeah. That was a wetlands. Okay. So we're done with that one. Okay, here we go. Next one. The distance between wetlands and building on a parcel of land containing regulated wetlands is called it's a buffer zone. It's not a no build zone. Um, that we don't call it that, even though you're probably not going to be able to build on it, but we don't call it that. It's called a buffer zone, not a safety zone, and not a no fly zone. If you had an Air Force base, that would be a no-fly zone. Can't fly over that. But no, it's a buffer zone, and that's between the wetlands and buildings. Okay, so hopefully, they don't have foundation problems and that sort of thing. They're not going to be able to get a permit. Is what it amounts to. Okay, let's look at another one. Latent defect. Latent. Latent means it's already there. Okay, can be seen by any reasonable can be seen by any reasonable walkthrough. No. Latent means it's kind of hidden, kind of. It's been there for a while, and it's I don't know, may not show a lot of problems. Latent kind of means it's not evident. Okay. B, it might not be discovered by a regular inspection. Yep, may not be. It's illegal. What? Like having a methamphetamine lab? No, it's not illegal. It's just a latent defect. It can never be repaired. Of course not. Many latent defects can be fixed. And that's something that, you're going to have to discuss. The lead-based paint we were talking about earlier could be a latent defect. Okay. But if you're not doing a lead-based paint inspection, and the way they do that, it's kind of cool. They have a little machine. It's kind of like an X-ray machine. It's kind of like that, and or at least it uses that type of technology. I mean, it's not as strong as an X-ray machine, but it has a little bit of that. And so if those machines can't whatever radio frequency or everything they're using in there, it can't be, it's not transmitted through lead. My son's a chiropractic doctor, and he has an X-ray machine in his clinic, and he has a lead wall and a lead piece of glass that you can see through that has lead in it. So his staff and himself can step around that wall while they're X-raying, and they can't be harmed by the X-rays. But a regular inspection, doesn't it's not going to find that. So if you know there's a problem, you might want to do a little bit more in-depth testing. Um, and we already talked about radon methamphetamine, which a lot of inspections don't include unless you ask for it and it's kind of an upgrade. But, you know, we have a real methamphetamine problem in Utah, and it's it's you got to be really careful. And there are some really cool once you get your license. Um, you need to take some of the CE classes that specifically teach about some of the dangers and how to protect yourself and your buyers and whatnot uh, from methamphetamine. It, you know, I mean, some of these guys actually teach that you um, be extremely careful of your shoes. If you walk into a home and it has had meth in it, there was one home a few years ago that had methamphetamine, and if you wanted to go look at it, you had to wear a suit, a little zip up suit, and you had to have booties on your shoes and everything else, and the mask, and can you imagine that? Um, you know, but boy, that made it real enticing to buy that home. It did sell, but I mean, the sellers either didn't have the money or they didn't want to put the money in the home to fix all those problems. So they sold it at a significant discount, for the time and effort and trouble and the professionals that had to come in and fix all that stuff. So, it didn't sell for high market. It sold for way, way under market because the sellers didn't want to put the money in it to fix it up. So that's okay. You have a lot of sellers, maybe they inherited it or whatever, and they maybe they don't have the money to fix it up, but it's not that they couldn't get the money, but they just don't want to invest the money, and so that's fine. But they need to understand they're not going to get top market value for it. Something that's pristine and beautiful and inspected and no problems um, will always sell for more, right? I mean, if it needs a new furnace, because the other one's cranky and doesn't work all the time. You got to put one in, or lower the price by a few $1,000s. So definitely not illegal, and can never be repaired. Usually, you can repair a lot of things, but you're not going to see it in a walkthrough. Okay, that was the latent defect. Okay, so now we're talking about if a broker is representing the seller of a property that has environmental hazard, they must what? A, notify the buyer that the property cannot be sold. Well, then why is it on the market? Notify the buyer that if they have any knowledge of the hazard, that if they have any knowledge of the hazards, not disclose anything to the buyer as it's a stigma. Prevent the seller from speaking with any buyers. I mean, obviously those last two are deceptive. We don't do deceptive. We do disclosure, and we do over disclosure in some cases, which is hard to do. But well, why do we have to disclose that? Well, because that's our office policy, like the stigmatized property. We told the buyer from New York on that property where the lady died in the home, and they didn't care. That's fine. I mean, that can happen. We like the house, we love the house. Um, and they liked us too because we're just forthright and honest. And so um, when they got transferred again in a couple of years, we got the listing. And the next one, please. Gia is selling their property as is, and they've instructed their broker not to disclose several defects in the property, which is true. Broker must disclose all known defects. Well, that's warm and fuzzy. I'd hang on to that one. B, the broker must follow G, the seller's instruction, and avoid disclosure. Hey, I want you to lie. I know you, well, just don't lie, just don't tell. So it's lying by omission. Okay, so you have to disclose. Okay, the defects need not be disclosed in the property sold as is. No, no, just because you're selling it as is doesn't mean if you know of a problem, you don't have to disclose it. It just means we're not fixing it. So yeah, it's got lead-based paint on that lot in Park City, or lead contamination, and it's going to have to be dug out. And we had some estimates done, and here's what it's going to cost and whatnot. And we've taken that into consideration in the price. That's all fine, but you just don't hide things. Okay, you have to disclose all known defects. Okay, and it's just the right way to do business, and particularly if you want to have repeat business. you know, oh, they're a lying bunch of people over there. No, no, no. We don't do that. Okay. Not a good thing. Our next question talks about the stigmatized properties again. And it's a property that has latent defects, has blatant defects, has no physical defects, but is avoided for other reasons, cannot be sold. Well, cannot be sold. No. But we're talking about stigmatized, right? So is that blatant or latent? The correct answer to this one, guys, is C. It has no physical defects, but is avoided for other reasons. Okay. Like someone dying in the home. Okay. Years ago, we had a horrible individual that lived in the Sugar House area that was raping children. And we caught him eventually. Some of that went on in the house that he lived in. It was right on 21st South. And anyway, it was really bad. But eventually he was caught, and I think, and he's still in prison. As far as I don't think he gets out for quite a while yet. But no physical defects, but it's avoided for other reasons. Well, that's stigmatized. So it was known, at least in the real estate community, where that house was, and it was sold, and it was disclosed. Okay, there was no physical defect, but it was avoided for other reasons because it was stigmatized. So did it affect the pricing? Yes, it did. It sold for about 10, 15 grand less than what other comparable properties in the area were selling for, because you had to find the right buyer that was willing to live with that, or to whatever he did to cleanse the house of the horrible things that had happened there. So whatever. Um, but that was stigmatized. Next one, please. Next one says when a sales agent is showing a property to their buyer, client. Client means you're representing whom? The buyer. And they notice an encroachment. Now, an encroachment is an illegal trespass. What should they advise the buyer? Okay. They require require that the encroachment be removed before the closing? Well, that's going to have to be contractual. It's got to be in the agreement. But I don't know if you can. The seller could still say no. I mean, look at the next one. B, not to submit an offer on the property. Well, it depends. And an encroachment means it could be something minor, like the fence line, the property line. Wasn't really figured out before the neighbor put the fence in, and he's 3 inches over onto your property, or an inch and a half onto your property, or something. Maybe that's not that big a deal. Maybe it is. But not to submit an offer on the property. Well, I don't know. Depends on what it is. Or consult an attorney before making an offer on the property, or leave the property immediately. Well, an encroachment's an illegal trespass. It doesn't necessarily mean there's anything dangerous about the property itself, but they really ought to consult an attorney, because an attorney will tell them, well, this could affect a eventual sale down the road when you want to, because you're going to have to disclose it to the next buyer. Or they might say, well, in my experience being a real estate lawyer, I wouldn't go talk to the guy that did your divorce. Get a real estate attorney. Consult an attorney before making an offer on the property. Say, well, we see this once in a while. Uh, it, it, most things can be handled by a reduction in price, or fixing it one way or another. But you really ought to talk to an attorney. Okay. And they really ought to talk to a real estate attorney, someone that knows what they're talking about. Sometimes you can send them into the title company. Sometimes title companies have in-house attorneys that may or may not be able to talk to them. But you need to have on your team a good real estate lawyer, that your buddies with, and, I mean, maybe you go golfing together, I don't know, or maybe, whatever you do, but they need to be on your team, and they need to know what they're talking about, because there's a lot of things that attorney can do for you or do for them that you should not be doing. Like, people will say, well, how do you think I ought to be vested in title? Should I be a tenancy by entirety? Should I be a joint tenant? Should I be a tenant in common? Should I take it in severity? What should I do? Well, in my experience, you really ought to, do this or that. Well, you don't know their situation, and you're not an attorney. So we don't give legal advice. And if you do, it's going to come back to haunt you, and big time, and your broker. So, we don't give legal advice. They say, well, I really would advise you at this time to get an attorney. And I would document the fact that I advise them that. Um, and how are you going to do that? Well, self-serving emails. So you send them an email and it says that, well, I'm so excited that you're interested in making an offer on this particular property. But as I discussed with you, have you had a chance to find an attorney? And yeah, I thought, well, maybe I ought to make a couple of recommendations for you. But it, I just really want you to be comfortable with the fact of how this could affect the value going down the road a few years. So that way you can document that you advise them. There's this malady that some buyers have. Thankfully, not most, but some buyers have this malady. It's called selective memory loss. And you say, well, remember I told you you needed to talk to an attorney, and I even gave you maybe an example of one or two that you might want to talk to that, knew what they were doing. No, I don't remember that at all. Do you remember when I sent you this email? Oh yeah, now I remember. Yeah, you did. But we thought we didn't really need one. Well, that's up to you. So they get what they got, you know. But at least you said, well, look, you really ought to talk to an attorney because this could affect the marketability of the property in the future. Or, the attorney can tell you what it might cost to fix this problem or a number of different issues. An attorney is the one that should tell you how to, you know, um, be vested in title. You don't know. You just don't know. I mean, I was working with a nice couple one time. They had three little kids. Those really sweet little kids, and we're showing them properties and whatnot. They needed a bigger home, and everyone was calling her mommy and daddy and all this kind of stuff, and it was fine. But the real story behind all that was the fact that the children were not the man's kids. It's a subsequent marriage, which is great. Stepdad comes in, it's fine. I mean, it's a great thing. I hope it works out well for everybody. But the money to buy the house came from the former, well, the dad's, the former husband's life insurance. Okay. Now, and so if they said, well, how do you think we ought to be vested in title? And I said, well, a nice couple like you guys, because you don't know their background. Everyone's calling everyone mommy and daddy and everything else. Usually you take title as joint tenants, full rights of survivorship. Well, then she dies and he gets the property. Well, the problem was maybe the money that came, the source of that money to buy that property, which was all hers after her first husband died, came from her deceased husband's life insurance. Well, and so this guy never liked the kids anyway, so he sends them home to grandma and grandpa, and the grandma and grandpa, may love to have the kids, but they thought it was extremely unfair that you got the house, because it came from their son's life insurance. So this is going to be a real problem. So how should they take title? It depends on too many factors, and the only one that can give them the proper advice is an attorney. And you know, um, you need to recommend someone that they can talk to that knows what they're doing. Okay, don't say, "Well, just go talk to an attorney," and this guy does trust, or he does, any type of law. Maybe he's a divorce lawyer. I don't know, but he's not a real estate lawyer. And even though he's a lawyer, he does not that familiar with things and all the do's and don'ts. So you need to have a real estate lawyer you can recommend it's on your team. Now, I just wanted to mention here that there's a lot of what I consider misinformation going around about making recommendations. Okay. And here's what people say. They say, well, don't ever just recommend one person. You have to recommend at least three, because that way you could not be held responsible. Here, pick one of these, they're all good, well, but you still recommended them. Okay. I don't recommend three. I recommend one. You got to go talk to this person. And say, well, no, we'll find our own lawyer. That's great. Fine. Or we'll get our own title company. That's fine. Whatever they want to do. But you still recommend it, even though you recommended three. That's not going to get you off the hook. And you're not really on the hook anyway. But I don't know. You do what you want to do. But let's talk about loans for just a second. If you recommend three lenders all the time, go back to go to blank. Okay. Um, if you recommend like three lenders, okay, all the time, um, I think that could be very cumbersome. Now you may have a lender that specializes in first-time buyers. So why do you want to recommend a guy that does high-end houses and doesn't work with first-time buyers? Not that a first-time buyer couldn't buy a high-end house, but there's a lot of people are getting low down payment type loans or special government subsidized type programs that are floating around the state from time to time. Um, there are a lot of companies that come up with special products, and they may only be good for like 10 or 15 loans. And um, for instance, I have one lender that specializes in government type loans. FHAs, VAs, and Utah Housing Authority and that kind of thing. That's what they love to do, and that's what they do, and they do an excellent job. So if I've got a guy that just is strong enough to get a conventional loan, I may not take him there, or I might. It depends. But uh, I don't recommend volumes of people, because if you have a lender and they know that you shop every deal, like, oh, I can get an eighth of a point less over here at Hot Dog Lenders instead of you. So I took them over to Hot Dog because I wanted to save my buyers. I wanted them to get the absolute best. Well, that's fine, but an eighth of a point, or even a quarter of a point, is not going to make that much difference in the long run. Particularly, and interest rates go up and interest rates go down. And some lenders, may quote a little lower rate, but when it comes time to close, oh my gosh, it went up a half a point. I mean, recommend lenders, first of all, that want to work with you and you want to work with them. But consider this. If this lender knows you shop every time, when you bring in a buyer, so maybe you'll get it, maybe you won't. Compared to another lender where you give them the majority of your business. Occasionally, some lender may have a special program that your normal lender doesn't do. I mean, who is he or she going to stay late tonight and work on these loans? This guy that she knows shops and she's got one, or this lender that they're currently working on three loans for you and they know that you're loyal to them. They're going to stay late and work on your deals. So I don't know. You do what you want to do, but you're going to get a lot of advice on, well, always recommend three or always recommend two and all this and that. And you still recommended it. I would advise you very strongly not to recommend people that can't get the job done and people that don't show up for work. I had a lender that, man, she was fantastic. We did lots of deals, dozens and dozens of deals together. We did marketing together. We did a lot of things together. She was fantastic. And then she went through some hard times, emotionally, and her personal life was gone to hell. And she quit going to the office, started drinking. It was a mess. So I went to her. I says, I love you. I mean, I love doing deals with you, but I can't use you right now because you're not showing up for work. Please, let's get your life back in order, and then we can do more business together. But recommend people that are recommendable, and be careful about recommending too many. Because you know, it's if 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 you have a lender and they're working on 3 deals for you, it's much easier to call her and say, "How are we doing on the Browns? How are we doing on the Smiths? How are we doing on the Jones?" Than it is to call 3 different lenders. And who's more important to her? The guy that shops her and maybe gives her 1 loan, or you that have 3 down there? I mean, who's she gonna call when special rates and programs come out? It's just, give loyalty and get loyalty. And if you want them staying, working over a weekend to get a deal closed, because it's got to close on Monday, they get things done. That's all I got to say about that. So beware of all these. Well, I always recommend at least 3. Bullshit, bull hunky. Okay, next one, please. How long must lead-based paint disclosures be kept by the broker? 3, 5, 2, or 1 year? 1 year is too little. 2 years is kind of getting there. 5 years is too much. So, what do you think the answer is, guys? It's A, 3 years. Lots of stuff is 3 years, so that shouldn't be a hard one to guess. But the lead based paint disclosures must be kept by the broker in the file for 3 years. Now, he's got to keep all the other records for 3 years anyway, but make sure it's a complete file. So, well, that completes the questions that we were going to do tonight. I have one more little thing I'd like to mention to you, and it's kind of a motivational thing. And it says, the prizes today are bigger than ever before for those who can hit the bull's eye. But marksmanship demands calm nerves, clear eyes, steady hands, and infinite practice. Are you training? Are you training? Now, we're entering a recessionary period. When I started back in 78, we were in a recessionary period. It is a great time to get into real estate. Bar none. And I'll tell you why. Because the sellers need you and the buyers need you too, because things are not easy. You need a great lens. You need a good home inspector. You need this team that you've built around you. And the harder it is to put deals together, the more professional your team has to be. And your sellers need you even more. In a 4.5% or 3.5% mortgage market, and there's very little inventory, and people can go for sale by owner and sell their house. They need to or want to. I think there's still a lot of dangers involved with that, but whatever. But of course I'd say that I'm a licensed real estate broker, but we're in a time when people need hard-hitting professionals, people that show up for work, people that get the job done, people that will work a weekend if they have to. I'm talking about lenders, inspectors, uh, fix it guys that need to get in there and fix a couple of issues that to a buyer, if he walks in and he sees 1 or 2 or 3 defects, every one of them is going to have $1,000 price tag on it. So, oh, wow, it'll cost $1,000 to fix that plumbing leak. Oh, it costs $1,000 to repaint that. Oh, it's going to cost $1,000 to fix that, shingles that are falling off the roof. Well, the roof might cost $1,000, but everything is not $1,000. Sometimes it's more, but most of the time it's less. And so, you home warranties are cool, but they cover after the fact, not things that occurred before the home warranty. So you need to fix things up. You need to make the properties marketable, and the more marketable all they are, the less hazard you're going to run into, and the less problems you're going to have going towards the closing. This is a great time to get into business, like I started with. I commend you. It's kind of the market I started with. I sold 53 properties my first year. I sold about 98 my second year. You know, And there's nothing special about me. I mean, you guys can do the same. This business can change your life. It can create a legacy for your family. But you got to work. You got to show up. You got to ask for referrals. And you gotta, if you drive by a vacant property, you don't drive by the vacant property. You stop, you get out, you look around, you see if you can find, you know, discreetly, maybe the owner's name in a mailbox, or you call your favorite title company. They look it up for you. You track down the sellers. You know, um, Vacant properties are really what got me going. And I just found one yesterday that I'm following through on today. When we were driving around looking, just for Sunday drive. There's a reason why the properties are vacant. And especially in this rental market, there's tons of renters that would love to be there. And maybe, this property I'm following up on, it appears that the sellers just got tired. I don't know. We put a tenant in. We thought he'd be good. And he signed a year lease, and he was gone in 3 months after we evicted him because he wouldn't pay the rent. Um, yeah, professional property management always does background checks and credit checks, and I mean, yeah, it's anyway. Sometimes unscrupulous individuals are looking for rent by owners because they know that the rent for rent by owner won't do a thorough background. And so they move in, they stay for a while, and they leave. Hopefully, they don't tear the property up or run their meth lab in there, because that could be disastrous too. But it's a great time to get into real estate, and there's all kinds of opportunities that will come your way. People need your help at this time. They need a hard-hitting professional agent. And if you can be that, you're going to do well. And you're going to love the business. And if it's not for you, you can always leave. I mean, it's easy entry. I mean, my gosh, it costs like $10,000 to become a massage therapist in 4 months. You could be in and out of real estate school for, join the board and everything else for a couple of grand, and you're up and running. You even got business cards and some signs. And nothing wrong with being a massage therapist. I love them, but but it's what an opportunity. I commend you. If I can ever do anything, or the school, to help you get through the test, or even get going into business, call. My number, 801-556-8000. That's 801-556-8000. Operators are standing by. I'm Rick Roller, and thanks for being with us tonight. We are committed to not only get you through the school, but to get you ready for the real estate exam. And we want you to pass the first time. It is a multiple choice test. Come on, give yourself some slack. You need a good solid C- to do it, but don't walk in there without being prepared. Okay, we want you to pass the first time. Do not screw up our stats. We have the highest passing rate in the state, and we want to keep that. Okay, call me if I can be of any help, or call the school. Happy to help you guys. Thanks for being with us tonight, and we'll see you out there. And thanks, Matt.
Thanks for joining us today. You are taking the right steps to get started on your real estate career, and we're proud of you. If you want to make sure you don't miss a single one of our videos, go ahead and subscribe to our channel right now. And if you want to show our instructors that you appreciate them, give them a virtual high five. Click that like button. If you want to join us for our Prep My Exam reviews that include all the tools you'll need to get started in real estate on the right foot, go ahead and click the link in the description, and we'll see you there.